Awesome. Okay, so first of all, you should be docked up. Do not fly around while we're having this class, because that would be an unwise decision when you're doing math. We will not have a practical today because I am in Anoicus, and that would be not so good. Wormhole space. But we are going to have a quote-unquote math practical where I give you guys some problems, and the first person to tell me the correct answer will get cash prizes. Huzzah! Wouldn't have been more fun if you had cash prizes for doing math problems. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with Gunnery 201. What we're going to be talking about today, for the vast majority of the class, is the two-hit equation. That is the equation that determines whether or not you're going to hit somebody, or the percent chance that you're going to hit somebody, and how you can use it to your advantage. This isn't just going to be, here's what it is and here's how it works. It's going to be, hey, here's what it is, here's how it works, and here's how you, in whatever ship you're flying, whether you're trying to escape damage or apply damage, can use this to your advantage. This would be a completely pointless class if I was just teaching you the theory. I also want to teach you some of the practice of this. So let's start with the actual equation. If everybody can click on that link. This is the equation that determines whether or not you are going to hit your target. So it is a little bit of a complicated equation, but we're going to break it down and it's going to be really simple. So we're going to talk about each part, and we're going to really work on how each of the three different parts of this equation works and how you can use them to your advantage. So the turret two-hit chance is 0.5 to the power of three different terms. The first term is the tracking term. So that's the one that says transversal speed, which really should be transversal velocity, over, well, I guess it's transversal speed because we don't worry about direction, over range to target times turret tracking. So that's the first of these three terms, is the tracking term. That is multiplied by the size term, or the turret signature resolution over the target's signature radius. So you multiply those two terms together, square them, and then add it to what we call the range term. So this is the maximum of either 0 or the range to target minus turret optimal range over fall off squared. Who's confused yet? Okay. So let's talk about this a little bit. This is not an equation that CCP has given us. This is not an equation that's listed in any official documentation anywhere. This is, enterprising people have gone out, tested extensively, and derived this formula from practice. Now, there's nothing that says that this is an absolutely perfect formula for how it works, but extensive testing has showed that if you follow this formula, you are going to get very likely the exact way that it works in EVE. One of the things that makes EVE a little different from other MMOs is that the two-hit chance, the chance that you're going to hit somebody, is very closely linked with the amount of damage that you're going to do to somebody. It's not nearly as much of a dice roll situation. If you are perfectly within your optimal range and they are sitting still, you are not only going to have a high chance to hit them, you're going to have a high chance to apply your full amount of damage. So this equation is the two-hit chance. This is not the equation for how much damage you're going to do, but just know that it is very, very closely coupled with the amount of damage that you're going to do. Does that make sense to everybody? Another thing that makes EVE very different from other MMOs is that it's far more difficult. This is one of my favorite images. We are climbing up that hill right now, but trust me, we will put you in that bulldozer before this is all over. Okay, so going back to the to-hit equation a little bit. Like we said, it is 0.5 to the power of the combined term, and that combined term is the tracking term times the signature term, those two squared, plus the range term. Okay, so let's talk very first about the tracking term. Okay, so the tracking term is transversal speed over the range to the target times the turret tracking. Can anybody tell me what transversal speed is? Anybody? Speed at an angle is a really good way to think of it. In EVE, your transversal speed, which is measured in meters per second, angular velocity is measured in radians per second, but transversal speed is measured in meters per second, that you are moving in relationship to the other guy. So I don't want to get into like multi-term physics here, but essentially there are three different velocities that EVE measures. Radial velocity, which is the amount at which the distance between you is changing, right? So if you're moving toward the guy, the distance between you is changing rapidly. If the two of you are moving both in the same direction at the same speed, your radial velocity is not going to be changing. So that's one, radial velocity. Angular velocity, which is the amount at which the angle between the two of you is changing, right? So that's his speed perpendicular to the radius. Again, that's angular. And then there is transversal. The reason that I like to have transversal in my overview, and I like to look at the transversal speed, is because the transversal speed is the one that actually exists in this tracking term that we're talking about here. Cool. So essentially, if I'm standing still and the other guy is standing still, what is my transversal speed to the other guy? Right. So who can tell me what happens to a fraction if we put 0 at the top of a fraction? It becomes 0, right? So if we're looking at this equation, right, we're looking at the to-hit equation, and my transversal speed is at 0, it doesn't matter what the target is, it doesn't matter what the other turret's tracking speed is. Does not matter, right? If my transversal speed is 0, then he has a much greater chance to hit me. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes, Capsman just got it. Okay, so let's do some basic math here. What is 0.5 to the first power? Exactly. Anything to the first power is itself. So if this whole equation ends up being 1, if everything in the top of the equation ends up being 1, then you have exactly a half chance, a 50% chance to hit the other guy. What happens if the term on the top ends up being gigantic? Like, let's say, what's 0.5 to the 10th power? You don't have to do it, but is it going to be a large number or is it a small number? It's going to be a very small number, right? Statistically, 0. So the larger this term on the top, the less chance that you have to hit somebody. What happens, like we said, if we put 0 on the top? So as we approach 0 in this combined term at the top. Right. As we approach 0 on this combined term at the top, we approach a 100% chance to hit the other guy. So if you want to apply damage to somebody else, you want the combined term to be as close to 0 as possible. So let's say I'm within my optimal range, so I don't have to worry about the third term over there. What happens to the second term if I multiply it by the first term, which is 0? We've already said that we're not moving. We're totally stationary. What happens when I multiply the second term by 0? It becomes 0 as well. So if the other guy is not moving at all in relationship to me, and I am within my optimal range, I'm hitting him 100% of the time. This is an important thing to keep in mind, because as we talk about each one of these parts of the equation, we also want to talk about how it relates to actual space, right? How it relates to what you're doing in space. So if you want to mitigate damage, one of the best ways that you can do that is to keep your transversal velocity up to the other dude. LaFleur, exactly. Even if you have a big gun, you are still dealing a lot of damage to that other dude if he's moving still. Duke asks, is there no randomization at all? Not in the to hit if it is at 1, because it's 100%. But if the to hit is an 80% chance, then there is a chance you won't hit the guy. Much of the randomization comes in the actual damage application, because in relationship to these percentages, you're also going to get more or less damage based on whether you have a higher or lower percent chance to hit somebody. So there is some randomization, but not enough that when the other guy is at 0 and you're at 0 and you're in your optimal, you're still going to be dealing damage. Now, let's say we start to move a little bit. Now this becomes important. So let's say that my transversal speed is 100 meters per second. Okay? And then my range to target times my turret tracking is going to come in important. So can somebody link me a 1400 millimeter howitzer artillery 2? This is a gun that we were talking about a little bit earlier. Dreth, is there anything in Eve like criticals? Yes, there are, I can't remember what the name of them is, but there is a 5% chance if you're within your optimal range of getting what's essentially a critical blow. There are the opposite of criticals, which are glancing blows, and those are much more likely when you're outside of your optimal or you're not tracking as well. A perfect shot, there we go. So if everybody looks at this howitzer artillery, you can see that we have in the attributes tab something that's called the tracking speed. Okay? So if we look at the tracking speed on this gun is 0.009 radians per second. So if my transversal velocity is high, and I have to multiply it by this relatively small number in the denominator, what am I doing to the number in this first term? Am I making it higher, or am I making it lower? If we have a really small number in the denominator. Okay, what is 1 divided by 0.1? Right. So the smaller the denominator gets, the bigger the answer becomes. Right? One of those principles of fractions. We're getting back into math, I promise. Okay, so let's think about this. If our numerator is high and our denominator is low, what are we doing to our chances to hit? What happens if we get a really high number and say 0.5 to a really high number? Right, we are decreasing our to hit chance. So the smaller the tracking speed of a turret is, the harder time it's going to get, the larger the transversal velocity is. So if somebody's moving really fast around you and your turret can't track them accurately, then you're going to have a much lower chance to hit. It makes sense, right? Let's say that I'm in a tank and I'm trying to shoot at a rabbit that's running circles around my tank. That tank turret is not going to be able to track as fast. But let's say that I am in one of those guns from the third Matrix movie where they're like whipping around really fast, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? Oh, how about let's do this. The guns from the Millennium Falcon, right? Let's say I'm in one of those and I'm shooting in a Megatron. It's going to be much easier to do. If my tracking speed is relatively high and the other guy's going relatively slow in comparison, I'm going to have a much better chance to hit. That makes logical sense, right? So this is the tracking term of this equation, one of the three. LaFleur's got it exactly right. But if the tank starts to follow the other ship, so if they're both moving in the same direction, it reduces your transversal velocity. If you and another ship are stationary, your transversal velocity will be 0. But if you and another ship are moving parallel to each other at exactly the same velocity, your transversal velocity is also 0. So keep in mind, it's not just about how fast you're moving, it's also about how fast the distance between you is moving, right? Another way to think about it is that if I am flying directly toward you, my angle to you is not changing at all, and your turrets just have to point in a straight line. No matter how far away I am, I'm still tracking you. So if somebody talks about getting your transversal up, it means moving perpendicular to your target. It means moving in a circle around your target. Does that make sense to everybody? The direction matters just as much as the speed. Cool. Let's move on to the second part of our equation. So the second part of our equation is the signature part. So like we talked about in Gunnery 101, every ship has a signature radius and every weapon turret has a signature resolution. The difference or the ratio between these two is what's going to determine this part of the equation. So can somebody link me a Megatron in our classroom channel? Okay, so if everybody clicks on this battleship and you go over to the Attributes tab, you can see how big the game says it is. There are things like mass and there are things like volume that are important if you're moving the ship around or you're moving it through wormholes. But for the purpose of gunnery, how big the ship looks to another ship is something called the signature radius. Now at the very bottom, can somebody tell me what the signature radius for a Megatron is? Right, so the signature radius for a Megatron is 380 meters. That means that in the game, this Megatron looks like a circle, a circular target that is 380 meters. Gloom asks, can we go over that last point about orbiting? I have missed smaller ships even though my angular was lower than tracking speed. That's true. There is a % chance to hit. So even if your tracking speed is exactly the same as the other guy's, angular velocity does not take into account range, right? So if their range is really low and they're orbiting around you at a particular transversal velocity, then even though your guns might be able to track them at a farther out angular velocity, the transversal velocity is also going to be higher, okay? So this is one of those things that, one of the reasons that I like transversal velocity, because it very accurately shows me what's going on in relation to my ship, not only in terms of speed around me, but speed around me and back and forth towards me. Another thing is that even if you're tracking perfectly, you might be out of optimal range. So this is a complex equation that has a lot of different parts. Just because you're tracking them doesn't mean you're going to hit them. And this signature is another important part of that. So comparatively, how easy is it going to be to hit a Megatron with a small ship? Okay, the equation is not that complex, but depends. Okay, so can somebody link me a small artillery turret of some kind? Okay, so if you shift-click on the light carbine howitzer, you'll open up another window so that we can still have our Megatron window. So can anybody tell me the signature resolution of this turret? Okay, 40. So what is my signature term going to equal if I'm firing my light carbine howitzers at this Megatron? Everybody go look at your equation. Riley, you've got it upside down. Yes, so Keelan's got it right. It is 40 divided by 380, so it's 0.105. So again, like we said, the smaller numbers that we have up top in our combined term, the better our chance to hit is going to be. So again, I'm ignoring the other two terms for right now. 0.5 to the 0.105 is going to be a relatively good chance to hit somebody. Now, let's swap that around. Can somebody link for me an Atron and our 1400 millimeter howitzer artillery again? Okay, great. So we don't have the artillery 2 this time. We have the scout artillery, which is the Meta 4, which is perfectly fine. So everybody click on the Atron and then shift click on the artillery so that we have both of them up. What is the signature radius of the Atron? .35. Much smaller, right? Much smaller than the Megatron. What about the signature resolution of our artillery guns? 400. All right, so you guys do the math. What is 400 divided by 35? 11.4. Okay, so again, the larger number that we have in our combined term, the less our chance to hit is. So all other things being equal, you're going to have a hard time hitting a small ship with big guns. Easy enough, right? I mean, that is totally logical. That if you're firing large, hard-to-track guns at a very small ship, it's going to be hard to do. But again, guys, let's talk about Bay gun. I don't think so. 400 divided by 35 is 11.4. Yes, we're going to work on the squared later. Yes. But we're just doing one term at a time right now. I know. We have to worry about the squared once we add in our first two terms. But, okay, so conceptually, let's think about it this way. Let's talk about our first two terms together now, because Bacon is itching to talk about our first two terms together. So, if we're in an Atron, and we are totally still, and the Megatron is totally still, and we're going to assume that the Megatron is within his optimal range because, I don't know, he's firing 1400 millimeter scout artilleries, which is an unbonused weapon for his ship. But let's say that we're firing these scout artilleries at an Atron, okay, and the Atron is totally still. What is our chance to hit going to be? About. Boom. Exactly. Our chance to hit is going to be boom. Our chance to hit is going to be very, very high. So how about I give you a quick little problem here. Let's say that my transversal speed to the target is 0, that my range to target with these howitzer artilleries is going to be 10 kilometers, and that I'm firing these howitzer artilleries at my Atron. What is my combined first two terms going to be? 0, exactly. If that numerator in the first term is 0, it doesn't matter what the other stuff is, right? It doesn't matter. It's always that first combined term is going to be 0, which means 0.5 to the 0 power is 1. Ed Aladdin says that's why you always move in small ships. Absolutely. one of the first things that you learn in a Unista in fleets is that if you are in a cruiser or below and you are just waiting on a gate, you're going to move. And you need to be moving. You need to be keeping an orbit around that gate. Because if you don't, then a hurricane is going to warp in at range. A hurricane is going to lock you very quickly because he has modules on his ship that are going to increase his targeting range or his targeting speed. He's going to fire at you once and he's going to kill you. Let me see if I can find an example. So, the link that I just posted is me as a young nubbin Unista, which was not that long ago. I was flying a Griffin in a Uni fleet because I do quite like E-War. And I was sitting at 0 on a gate and not moving. And this tornado warped in and he blapped me instantly. If you'll notice, this is exactly what we're talking about right now. He had the same kind of gun that we have open right now, the 1500mm Scout Artilleries. He had a rack of them. And he came in at his optimal range +1 fall-off, took one shot at me, and I exploded. So, moral of the story is, move. Especially when you're in a smaller ship. Keep up your transversal velocity to the enemy. Okay. So those are the first two terms of the equation, and to me, they're the two most difficult terms to understand. I think that once you get a hold on those first two terms, the third term becomes a little bit easier. So let's take it. So turn afterburners on and micro warp drives off. That's actually a really excellent point. Can anybody tell me why we wouldn't want to have micro warp drives on? Right. So micro warp drives give you a penalty to your signature radius. It is 500% of your signature radius added on, so you're 6 times bigger. It is the signature radius plus 500%. So if you add a micro warp drive to your ship and you think you're in a really small ship, but you turn on your micro warp drive, Duke, I'm not 100% sure that I was orbiting very fast. I might have just been orbiting like at a quarter of my velocity and manually turned myself really slow so I didn't get out of jump range because I was a really nubbin Unista. But point being, if you turn on your micro warp drive, you blow up your signature and you make it really easy for larger guns to apply damage to you. If you're still, but the whole reason that they added a signature penalty to a micro warp drive is because you are subsequently increasing your transversal velocity. So it's a balance thing. In order to offset the increase to your transversal velocity, which is one of those numerators in our first term, right? We have to increase the signature resolution of your ship, which is the denominator of one of those other things. So there's this trade-off. If you have a micro warp drive on and you're keeping up really good transversal velocity, it can be really useful. But if you have your micro warp drive on and you're running straight toward the guy, you're just making yourself a big, easy-to-hit target. Basically, a micro warp drive compared with an afterburner doesn't make any difference in your chances of being hit. The answer to that question is it depends. If you're using your micro warp drive effectively, it can decrease your chance of being hit because you're moving faster at a transversal velocity. But if you just turn on your micro warp drive and sit still, not only are you burning capacitor, but you're just making yourself a target. So it really very, very much depends on the situation, the ship you're flying in, which direction you're flying, how fast, all of that jazz. So it really depends. Duke says, question, so when we do the math, the speed gained from the micro warp drive has to be combined with transversal to offset the sig penalty. Well, the speed you're gaining in your micro warp drive is already going to be factored into your transversal velocity. Because if I'm moving at 500 meters per second, around, or let's say my transversal velocity is 150 meters per second without my micro warp drive on, but I turn it on and all of a sudden my transversal is 500 meters per second, then you have definitely made up for your signature resolution or your signature radius penalty. You've definitely made up for it by your increased transversal velocity. And we'll do real-world examples of all of this stuff. So let's talk a little bit about the third term. So the third term is the range term. Can anybody tell me what that little max means in the numerator there of that fraction? Exactly. As 1, 2, and Bubba said, it means that you take the larger of two values, which, as Tom said, means that in this case, the top is always going to be positive. There's the formula again in chat.e-uni. If you are not in the in-game browser, Control-Shift-Tab reopens the last browser tab you had. At least it does in Chrome. I don't know about you guys. Okay, so this third part of the equation, let's look at the top first. The numerator is going to be the max of 0 or the range to the target minus your turret optimal range. So let's up our howitzer artillery again. This is going to be the go-to weapon that we're talking about today in class. Yeah, I don't know any way to reopen tabs in the in-game browser. Okay, so click on the artillery. What is the optimal range? Okay, so the optimal range for this 1400 millimeter Scout artillery is 48 kilometers. So that means that in this third term, if my range to the target is anywhere below 48 kilometers, this term is going to be 0. So that means that if I am within my optimal range, I can ignore the final term. If I'm within my optimal range, the final term does absolutely nothing to the first two terms. Does that make sense to everybody? If 0 is my numerator, then the whole term is going to be 0. Now, where this becomes more difficult is when we're fighting outside of our optimal range. Okay, so make an example of this. Let's say that I'm in a tornado, right? And I am firing at this Atron, because let's do a tornado because it's actually a bonus ship for these artilleries, whereas our Megatron would look quite funny fitting artillery on his ship. So let's say I'm in a tornado and I am 20 kilometers away from this Atron that I've been shooting at all day, because apparently this Atron is good at keeping up his transversal velocity. But now he's stopped, so the Atron is not moving. I am not moving. I am within 20 kilometers. My chance, exactly. So Bubba Chi just put it in there. The max of 0, or my range to the target, which is 20, minus the optimal range of my turret. So if all it said was 20 minus 48, then I would have a negative value at the top. But because 0 is greater than all negative numbers, then the top of my equation is going to be 0. Now let's do a slightly more complicated example. Let's say that I'm firing the howitzer artilleries, but I am 60 kilometers away from my target. If you open up the Scout artillery again, you'll be able to get not only the optimal range, but also the number that you need for the denominator of this equation, the accuracy fall-off. So who can tell me the accuracy fall-off of this 1400 millimeter Scout artillery? 35 kilometers. Exactly. So we want the max of 0, or the range to the target, which was 60 kilometers, minus the turret's optimal range, which is 48 kilometers, divided by the fall-off. So the maximum in this case is not going to be 0. It's going to be 60 minus 48, which is 12, right? Divided by 35 gives us 0.34. And then, as Baygun points out, we're going to square that term. So it becomes 0.1156. So this is what we are adding to the other side of the equation, the first two terms. So when we get into real-world examples, what this means is that the farther you get out of your optimal range, the less of a chance to hit you're going to have, because we're going to continually make this number on the top higher and higher and higher. So let's do another example. What if I am 200 kilometers away from this guy? So my optimal range is 48. I'm 200 kilometers away from him, and my accuracy fall-off is 35. What is my last term going to be? Yeah, it's going to be 18.8 squared. They're sort of separate, but the point is that you can be tracking him just fine. You can have the signature resolution versus signature radius just fine. But if he is out of your optimal range plus 2 fall-offs, you're going to have almost a 0 chance to hit him, because we're adding a very large number onto the end of this, and it's drastically decreasing your chances to hit somebody. Alexander puts it perfectly. Both can hurt you, but neither one is going to help the other one. You have to have both in order to hit the guy. What if he is at 108 kilometers then? It's still going to be hard to hit him. One of the things that we talked about in our Gunnery 101 class is that you want to stay within your optimal plus 2 fall-offs. Anywhere you get beyond optimal plus 2 fall-offs, you're going to start getting into the range at which you cannot hit the guy. In general, you want to be fighting within either your optimal range, or for some types of guns, especially autocannons and blasters, your optimal plus 1 fall-off range. Does anybody have any questions on this third term? Cool. So again, before we go on and do some real-world examples and start getting out cash money, let's go back over the 3 terms quickly. So again, our first term is our tracking term. And if we want to be able to apply damage to somebody, then we want our transversal speed to them to be as low as possible. We want our turret tracking to be able to keep up with how far away we are from them, and we want our range to the target to be optimized, right? So another way to think about this is angular velocity over turret tracking, but the transversal speed is the one that's going to give you a much more accurate picture in this equation, okay? So again, tracking equation is all about how you can apply damage based on how fast you are moving in comparison to somebody else using transversal velocity. Question, is this all calculated the instant the gun fires? It is, yes. There's 0 travel time for any non-missile turret. That is exactly right. Okay, the second part of the equation is all about size. It is the signature resolution of the guns that either you or the other guy is firing over the signature radius of that person's ship. Now, a really easy misconception is that scan resolution can have something to do with this. Scan resolution, after you actually lock the guy, has nothing to do with whether or not you're going to hit him. your scan resolution is compared against the signature radius of the ship that you're attempting to shoot. And that is the amount of time that it takes you to lock that other person's ship. So the second term is all about size. And now the third term is all about range. And you want to make sure that if you're trying to apply damage to somebody else, you are either within the optimal range of your turret, or you are within the optimal range plus one fall off. The farther away you get out of that, the less and less your chance to hit the other guy is. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. Okay, so 1-2 buckle my shoe says, so if we want to blap Unistas in an RD NATO, we should warp to the gated optimal plus fall off, target a bunch of them, and F1 the one with the lowest transversal. Exactly. Gloom says, where does angular velocity fall into the equation? It does not. Angular velocity is another way, and a slightly more complex way, to measure the same principles that transversal and radial velocities are measuring. I could teach an entire class on the relationship between radial, transversal, and angular velocities in three-dimensional space movement. Angular is transversal upper range. This is absolutely true. Yeah. That would actually be that would be first year college physics. If any of you want to take that, that's great. That'll teach you about three-dimensional and polar coordinate geometry, and from there we could go into various ways to describe the motion of two independent objects in a three-dimensional plane, but I'm assuming that we don't want to go there. Capsman, you can look at it that way, but the reason that I like to look at it this way is that I have my range to the target open on my overview. If I have my angular velocity open on my overview as well, then I'm measuring that quantity in my brain twice. I'm not necessarily measuring it for the equation twice, but since I have distance on my overview, and I have transversal on my overview, that way I can process those both, because I have to look at distance anyway for all of my range terms. That way I can process those independently. Cool. Okay, so then our third term is our range term, and we just talked about that. Okay, so let me field some questions, and then we'll do some real-world examples. Okay, Alexander Brunch. I guess the most important thing with what happens when you try to orbit somebody at 1500 with your micro-warp drive on, and why your transversal grows less than the speed bonus. At 1500 meters, I'm assuming you mean, it's going to be very hard to, as long as you're in a relatively fast ship, it's going to be very hard to get a really nice bonus with your micro-warp drive. But if you're farther away, like let's say that you're in an Inti, and you have bonus for a long point and maybe long webs as well, and you're orbiting at 15 kilometers, okay? If you are orbiting at 15 kilometers, and you don't have any prop mod on, you're going to be going relatively slowly. I mean, yes, an Inti is fast, but you're going to be going relatively slowly as far as transversal velocity goes. But you turn on that micro-warp drive, and now, because of the large radius, the 15 kilometers that you're orbiting around the guy, you're going to be able to get your speed up because the agility of that ship is fast enough that you can turn that fast. And that way you will be keeping a much higher transversal velocity. And in that case, having your micro-warp drive on is going to help more than having it off and not having the signature radius penalty. Herg. Transversal speed. If I'm shooting at him, I want it low. If he's shooting at me, I want it high. That's exactly right, but Bay Gun makes a great point that your transversal velocity to somebody else is exactly the same as his to you. It is a quantity that measures something between two objects. And so for each of those objects, the transversal velocity is going to be the same. Duke puts it another good way. Radians per second is slightly more unintuitive than meters per second, and that's another reason that I really like looking at transversal velocity. Ulrich, exactly. Kiting is very dangerous because your transversal is going to be low or zero unless you're boating off at not necessarily perpendicular angles, but maybe like 45-degree angles from the target. But then if he's chasing you, he's constantly going to be trying to keep his transversal as low as possible. So again, this equation is incredibly important in conceptualizing what you want to do with a ship. If I'm flying a Vindicator and I have large guns and I want to kill somebody, I want to get in as close as possible because I have big guns that have a very low optimal range. I want to web him down with my 90% Vindicator webs so that he is moving as slow as possible so that my guns can track him as much as possible. When you think about the way that ships are designed and the way that ships are bonused, it all relates back to this idea of tracking and range and size that is all encapsulated within this equation. And 12Buckamoshu says that kiting is made safer by the last element of this equation. Exactly, because kiting ships are generally going to have longer range guns with a higher optimal range and a higher fall off than ships that they are kiting against. Capsman says, if I orbit someone who's standing still, I would think that my angular speed to hit him is lower than his to hit me. Is that true? I believe that I don't work in angular speed all the time, but angular and transversal should not be different from one person to the other, because angular and transversal are both quantities that measure a velocity between two people. And so for those two people, it's going to be the same. Cool. Okay. Does anybody have any more questions about any of these terms of the equations? Because we're going to move on to some real-world examples. Capsman, yes, if you're in the exact same size ship, firing exactly the same sized guns. But again, it depends. If you're in a small ship and he's in a larger ship, you'll have a better chance to hit him. Okay, so for those of you who want to win cash prizes, now is your chance. I'm giving a 5 million ISK prize to the person who answers the first question right, a 20 million ISK prize to the person who answers the second question right, and a 50 million ISK prize to the person who answers the third question right. So get out your paper and pencil and calculators. You too could be a winner in math. Begun says, I have a fast question. What about hail, small, and reduced attributes? That's something that you're going to have to take into account. Because again, if we're just looking at things esoterically in the market, your skills are going to change some of those quantities. And the ammunition that you're using is going to change some of those quantities. So in order for you to get an accurate picture, you can't just look at the turret in the market, which is what we're going to do here in a second, because we're not all on the same ship with the same skills. But you have to look at the gun in your ship with your skills, with the kind of ammunition that you want to do. Yeah, and EFT is great for doing damage application graphs. Okay, so here's our very first real-world situation. Let's say I'm in a tornado. I am firing 1,400 millimeter howitzer artillery 2s. Can somebody link those? Okay, so that is the gun that I'm firing. I am firing against a Dramiel. Can somebody link a Dramiel? Okay. I'm in a tornado firing 14mm howitzer artillery against a dramule. I am 50 kilometers from the dramule. The dramule's transversal velocity is 0 meters per second. And I want you to give me, within 1/10 of a decimal point, what my chance to hit the target is. Nope. Oh. I still haven't seen the right answer. Can I see it in the form of a percentage? I think John wins. Yeah. Okay, John wins because it is 99.7% chance to hit. Good. John, please confirm that you got your money. Cool. All right. Moving on. Okay, so my second question. So my second question is, what happens in the exact same situation if my transversal velocity between the dramule and the target is now 50 meters per second, which for a dramule is a very slow transversal velocity against a tornado? Again, I want within 1/10 of a decimal point. But come on. Just based on the attributes that are in the market tab. Bubba is technically correct, yes, but okay, I'm getting a lot of 26.2 as the answer. That's not the answer that I got. So let's walk through this one a little bit. So again, let's look at the very first term. My transversal velocity is 50 meters per second over what is my, nope. So my range to target is measured in meters. So in this term, my range to target is measured in meters. So it's 50,000 meters, which is 50 kilometers, times 0.009, which gives me 450. So my first term is 50 over 450, which gives me 0.111. So that's my first term. Looking at the second term, it is 400 as the signature resolution of the guns divided by 32, which is the signature resolution of the dramule, which gives me 12.5. So my first term times my second term, I'm still waiting for a correct answer if anybody wants to type it out. So 0.111 times 12.5 gives me 1.388. So my very first term is 1.388 squared, or my first two terms together. Then my range term is going to be the max of 0, or 50 minus 48. It's still howitzer artilleries. So it's going to be 2 divided by 35. We're not worrying about the ammo for this equation. In real life, you would have to worry about the ammo, but I'm just trying to make this as simple as possible. Because we're not all on the same ship and all of that good jazz. So 50 minus 48 divided by 35 is going to give me 0.57. And then I want to square that 0.57 as well because my third term is squared. So eventually I am going to get 1.927 plus 0.003 is 0.5 to the 1.93 power, which gives me 27.22. Or is it 26.22? I think I have 27.22 written down. Oh my God, John won it again. I had 27.2 written down on my sheet, but it is 26.2. It's good that we walked through it though. Does this make sense to everybody now, how we're getting all of these values? Like Bubba said earlier, this is going to depend on what other skills that you have, and it's also going to depend on the ammo. Okay, so John confirmed that you just got your second cash prize of the day. Is John an app available in the iPhone? Okay, so we're going to move on to our third example. If John wins it, he splits it between him and the second person to get the prize. But if somebody else wins, then they get the full $50 million prize. It's only fair that way, because John already has $25 million from today. Okay, so here is our very last equation. You are in a Rifter. You are firing 150 millimeter light Scout autocannon 1s because you, like me, do not yet have small hybrid turret 5 and the blaster specialization. So if somebody can link our turret for us. Thank you very much. So again, you're in a Rifter firing that gun at a Maelstrom. Your range to the target is 5 kilometers. Your transversal speed is 250 meters per second. Go, go, go. And don't forget, in the first turn, your range is measured in meters and not kilometers. So you have to convert 5 kilometers to whatever that is in meters. Not worrying about ammo, just what the gun fires. 1-2 buckle my shoe. You would think so, wouldn't you? But yay, Paxty gets the correct answer. The correct answer is 57.7 meters per second. Now, 1-2 buckle my shoe said above, I believe it was him, chance is very good. And you would think so. So let's talk through this one, right? Let's talk through this one a little bit. We are at 250 meters per second. We are 5 kilometers from the target, times the tracking speed of this gun, which is very good. The tracking speed of this gun is 0.362 radians per second. So if we figure out our first term, could somebody link the equation again for grain? Yes, it is in there. So our first term is going to be 0.138. So that's pretty good. We're tracking pretty well at this point. It's relatively low. Then if we look at our second term, our signature resolution of the guns is 40 over the Maelstrom signature radius of 460, which is gigantic. It's a gigantic signature radius. we're going to get 0.087. When we multiply those two together and square them, our first two terms are going to be 0.0001. How do I find those items so fast? If you click on the weapon, or you search a Rifter, or you search a Maelstrom, they're all going to be in the Attributes tab. So if we are looking at just the first two terms, we have an excellent chance to hit. We have a great chance to hit. But we have to worry about our range term. And yes, 1-2 buckle mushu, you're right, 60 is good, but it's not 100%. So if we look at our range term, it's going to be our range of 5 kilometers minus our optimal range of 1.08 with these guns. And if we divide that by our turret fall off, which is 4.4, we're going to see that actually we are not even fighting within our fall off here. We're fighting within our optimal plus fall off plus another fall off. So that's going to reduce the chance at which we're going to hit the guy. So our second term, once we all get it all worked out, is going to be 0.794. So if you multiply, or if you add 0.0001 to 0.794, and then do 0.5 to the 0.794, oh, John, you're right. I'm just math dumb right now because I'm doing other math. We are within one follow-up. We come out to 0.577, which is a 57.7% chance to hit. So you in your Rifter are still going to hit that Maelstrom most of the time, and you're still going to hit him for a decent chunk of damage. Okay, so who was it that won? Paxty. So Paxty, please confirm that you just got your chunk of change. Awesome. Yes, and LaFleur, you were exactly right. All of the gunnery support skills that we talked about in 101 will absolutely improve your chances because they're going to help your tracking, they're going to help your range, your optimal and your fall-off ranges, all of this kind of stuff. And Eladin says, but the damage is minuscule compared to the Maelstrom's tank. Exactly. The amount of damage that you're going to apply with a tiny little artillery turret against a Maelstrom is going to be relatively small unless there are lots of you, just like 1-2 Buckle Mushu said. I'm going to go ahead and plug, just like I did in 101, one of my fleets that I take out. So frigates are still some of my favorite ships to fly, and one of the reasons that I like this fleet is that it can apply a lot of damage to bigger targets. We've taken down battle cruisers and cruisers all over the place with fleets like this, and we almost broke through a Hyperion's tank before a whole bunch of his friends showed up. So I hope we've reached kind of the end of the structured part of this class, but I am more than happy to answer questions for a while. Here is the forum thread for this class. If you have any suggestions about how to make it better or any of that kind of stuff, you can post in there and I will read it because I plan to teach this class often. And does anybody have any questions? Just go ahead and type them out. Frig Wolfpack Fleet Practical. But I really don't want to step on the toes of the next fleet that's going out at 1700. So I will make sure to call a Triforce fleet sometime in the next week. I will, I promise. But yeah, if anybody has any questions on gunnery of any kind or skills skills or opinions on fits or any of that good jazz, I'm happy to answer questions on anything related to pulling people up. Yeah, and this is one of those things that you shouldn't expect yourself to remember this equation each time you're out actually and somebody's shooting at you, because your heart's going to be pumping and your hands are going to be shaking and you're shooting at people and it's crazy. What I want you to remember is, oh yeah, got to keep my transversal up. Oh yeah, what's my optimal range? You know, oh yeah, is he a bigger ship or a smaller ship? If you can remember those really basic concepts and understand how they work within the whole, that is much more useful than pulling out the TI-84 in the middle of a fleet fight, right? I want you guys to understand this on a conceptual level, not just on a numbers level. So if you can understand all of the different parts of it, you're going to be much better at actually flying your ship effectively. It's not just about having good skills. A month-old Rifter pilot can kill an NT pilot that has much better skills if he knows what he's doing better than the NT pilot. This game is as much about out-of-game skills as in-game skills. Question, do you keep radial and angular on your overview as well as transversal? I do not. The radial velocity is something that I can measure in my head based on the way that their distance is changing. So if I know the distance from me to somebody else, I can quickly in my head know, okay, he's coming toward me, he's going away from me. And that, to me, makes radial velocity somewhat useless. For other people, they may like it, that's fine. And again, like I talked about, angular velocity is a combination of transversal and radial. And so for that reason, I like to keep distance and transversal because I can measure change in distance and transversal very quickly. It's a personal preference. I know a lot of people who use angular. I know a lot of people who use angular and transversal. But for me, distance and transversal are the two most important things that I like to keep an eye on. Question, if you keep transversal up, your chance to hit is reduced just as your target's chance is to hit you. Doesn't that prolong the fight? How do you pick optimal transversal speed? Well, Capsman, it depends. If his guns are tracking faster than your guns, then you want to slow down, because no matter how much he keeps his optimal up, you're going to benefit from a reduced transversal velocity because your guns are tracking slower. This is generally the case for bigger ships fighting smaller ships. That's why stasis webifiers are so useful, is that you're increasing your own chances to hit. You're increasing his chances to hit too, but his chance to hit is going to be greater than yours if the transversal velocity is higher. So at least this way you're evening the field. So the answer to that question is always, it depends. In general, if you're flying something with smaller guns with a higher tracking speed, you want to keep transversal high. If you're flying something that's slower with slower tracking guns, you want to keep his transversal low. Question, so what testing has been done on the damage equations? Has anyone come up with a similar result to the two-hit equation, or is it so closely related that it's not worth it? It is incredibly closely related, but there's a little bit more variability. The equations are basically the same, but at the end of the to-hit equation, there's going to be a randomizer on the amount of damage you do. So if the to-hit equation is really high, you're going to have a much better chance of getting good hits and sometimes the E version of critical hits. If the to-hit equation is low, you're going to have a much worse chance of getting good hits and a much better chance of getting things like glancing blows and missing altogether. So the two are totally tied together. Ruby Burke, if you think about this all, even with a bonus interceptor, since the micro-warp drive only gives you a disadvantage, in a frigate duel you should turn it off right. Again, it depends. If you know that he's going to have an easier time tracking you if you keep the micro-warp drive off, and your guns have a better tracking speed than his guns do, it might be useful to keep your transversal off, or to keep your transversal down. If he's in a ship that has drones, then definitely you want to keep the micro warp drive off to increase the amount of damage that you're applying with your guns to anything that he has. Because if he doesn't have to worry about tracking, but you do, then you want to minimize your transversal velocity as much as possible. Again, you can't say one frigate versus another frigate and not say what they are and know what's the best thing to do in each circumstance. And again, you may go out there and decide, hey, I really want to fly with railguns, small railguns that have decent tracking. Not great tracking, but decent tracking. Well, then it'd be more useful to keep your micro warp drive on and to keep that transversal up. I wanted to keep it simple, same frigates, but which frigates? Do you have better skills than he does on your tracking speed? That could change a lot. Try to sum up everything up, says Ferg. Basically, I want to keep my transversal high as much as possible without going above my turret tracking and stay within my optimal. If you want to deal damage, always stay within your optimal and always try and reduce the transversal velocity. Not always, but most of the time. But if you want to mitigate damage, then you want to keep your transversal high, and you want to make sure that you are outside of his optimal range. Pandera asks, if you are sitting still at 150 kilometers away from a target and your turret is flying at you with a speed of 1.3 kilometers per second, does that still equate to the transversal at 0? Yes. If the angle between the two of you is not changing, if one of you has no angular velocity, then it doesn't matter what the range is, the transversal velocity is going to be 0. Question, is it better to use orbit or keep it range? Again, it depends. If you are kiting and you want to keep at a particular range from somebody, but you want to keep your own tracking relatively high, and you know that he doesn't have the range to keep up with you, then if you use the keep at range, or if you manually fly directly away from him, you're keeping a good range. You're minimizing the transversal, so you're allowing your guns to hit better, and you're also staying out of his optimal range. But let's say that you're in a frigate shooting at a cruiser, then in that case, orbit is probably the better alternative because his guns are going to have a slower tracking speed than your guns. You're going to be able to track him. He won't be able to track you. So again, the answer is absolutely, it depends. Assuming you find a similar sized ship, so assume sig radius is not a factor, and ignoring range, if you find you miss him and he hits you, your best bet is to keep transversal low. Yes, if we're ignoring range. More often than not, if he is hitting you and you are not hitting him at all, as opposed to glancing blows or something like that, it's a range issue. But if you're getting less quality hits in on him, it's probably a tracking issue. Question, the two-hit equations only apply to weapons, not points, webs, E-war, etc. They use their own specific mechanics. Exactly. If you are within your range for webs, they will always apply. If you're within your range for scrams, they will always apply. Same for target painters, damps, and tracking disruptors. Now, ECM is a % chance to damp out based on your ECM strength, what skills you have in that particular ECM, and the usefulness of the module itself, against their sensor strength of a particular ship. So, for example, a targeted ECM jammer is going to have a higher ECM bonus than will a multispectral jammer that could jam out all 4 races. But a ship like a logistics ship, for example, is going to have a very high sensor strength and probably will have active modules to increase their sensor strength. So you will have a less chance of damping or jamming them out. But other than ECM, all E-War is 100% effective within its optimal range. Does that make sense? Yeah, and tracking painters are really useful not only for being able to target a ship quickly, but they are also very useful because they are going to mitigate some tracking differences. If the signature resolution of the other guy's, or the signature radius, excuse me, of the other guy's ship is larger because of a tracking painter, or a target painter rather, you are going to have a much better chance of killing him. There are a couple ships, Amar ships, that are bonused for tracking disruptors. The Crucifier is the one that's coming to mind right off the top of my head. Can't remember what the cruiser hull bonused for tracking disruptors is. There are there are a variety of Galente ships bonused for sensor dance, a variety of Caldari ships bonused for ECM, and a variety of Minmatar ships bonused for target painters. Yeah, but there's like an arbitrator, that's it. That's the T1 cruiser. I want to orbit, but how do I control the orbit, as in going around vertically as compared to being in line with the target? I'm assuming that you mean being in the same sort of vertical plane as the target. Yeah, no, it makes total sense. You have to do it manually. And generally that's the best way to pilot once you can wrap your mind around all of the other stuff, like activating your guns. As soon as you can get to the point where the mechanics of actually shooting at the guy are easy, then you should really work on your manual piloting skills, keeping an eye on distance, keeping an eye on transversal, so that you are able to maximize your effectiveness. A lot of people think that this game is orbit the anchor and hit F1, and sure, that's fine, but when you get into small gang and solo PvP, it is very much about positioning and motion. Big on, yes, it's easy to control the radius, but I think that Sarah was talking about controlling the actual angle at which you orbit somebody. So if you're going up and down, or if you're orbiting side to side, or if you're orbiting side to side the other way. Yeah, LaFleur makes a good point. A lot of the Alliance tournament matches were mirror matches, and it came down to manual piloting. Yeah, 1-2. My hope is to move some of that third year stuff into the first year. Sarah, no problem. Anybody have any more questions? All right, great. Well, I'm going to stick around for another 5 minutes in case anybody does. Thank you guys all for coming out. I'm going to put the link to the forum thread in here again. And if you have any more questions, wait for this flood of thank yous and you can ask it again. Absolutely, guys. Very, very happy. Is inside of optimal still optimal? Absolutely. Only inside of optimal is still optimal. So from 0 up through your optimal range. But one thing that you want to keep in mind is that the closer that you are to the other guy within your optimal range, the worse you're going to do, because the worse your guns are going to track. So if you don't want to be sitting at 0 on somebody because your guns are not going to track as well. You want to be sitting right close to the end of your optimal. Duke, yes, absolutely. You can get too close because your guns aren't going to track as well closer you are to somebody. Thank you guys, and you're welcome for the money. I just want to give people an incentive to really learn this kind of stuff, because maybe that 50 million is going to go into buying a ship that you won't lose because you killed somebody, because you know this. So Nuragan, not necessarily. Blaster boat with a 1K optimal, you want to sit at least at 500 from somebody, because if you're at 0, those large blasters or medium blasters are not going to track as well, because you're closer to somebody. It's like if you have a little rabbit that's going in a small circle around you, he's going to be going in that circle much quicker than if he was, 50 feet from you. He's still going fast, but the amount of time it takes him to do one rotation is much larger. So you want to increase your tracking, but also manage your optimal range. So sitting at 0 is not necessarily ideal. Even having a little bit of range can be very beneficial. Yeah, if you shoot at the rabbit, you might hit your foot. That's why in some of those Alliance tournament matches, you would see Vindicators get relatively close to somebody, put some webs on somebody, and then pull back a little bit. It's true. If you don't think that you're going to have trouble tracking somebody, for instance, if you think that you're going to be able to web them out, then heat sinks would be a better option. But if you know that you're going to be fighting smaller stuff, then maybe a tracking computer is a better option. Pandera asks, if my optimal is 102 kilometers, but my range would fall off, so optimal plus 1 fall off is 180 kilometers, would it be wiser to lock at 100 kilometers and burn away from them to reduce tracking speed? It depends. Were you fighting? If you're fighting something that is that's like a blaster boat that's going to have a relatively small optimal range, you might be better off just sitting still. Because if you move away and he starts moving perpendicular to you, then you increasing the range is increasing the transversal velocity. It might also be beneficial to burn towards him, but again, it is going to depend very much on what you're fighting. In general, if you know you have the range advantage and you are within your optimal, then you want to minimize transversal as much as possible. If you don't have the range advantage, you want to maximize transversal until you do have the range advantage. That's the whole difference between playing really close range and really long range setups. Close range setups want to be still. Long range setups generally want to continue to maximize range. But again, it really all depends. If you're a tornado and you're shooting at a carrier, then you want to burn away. But if you're a tornado and you're shooting at a frigate, you want to stand still. It's probably out of the scope for this class, but are there any pointers in figuring out the optimal range and tracking of your enemy? For sure. The biggest one is to do the research, just to know generically, okay, small blasters have this kind of tracking and this kind of optimal range. It's totally going to depend based on what meta level they have on their ship, what size of small blasters they have on their ship, what skills they have. But in general, if you know, you're going to be better off. And also if you know, okay, he's in a thorax. He's in a thorax that has shield boosting effects on its ship. He's probably in a rail fit thorax with a shield tank. So that tells you a lot. It tells you, okay, he's flying medium rails, and I would know, okay, medium rails have this optimal, this fall off, that kind of thing. Really, the best thing that you can do is do the research. Let me link you a great blog that has some of this information. So this blog by Azul Skull is spectacular for getting to know other ships and their capabilities and their common fits. I would highly recommend reading all of that if you want to get good at PvP. Anybody else have any other questions? If the enemy is bigger than me, I orbit. If it's smaller than me, I keep it range. If they are the same class, well, again, the first two are going to be generally true. If they are the same class, it's going to depend on a variety of different things. So, for example, let's say I'm in a Rifter with autocannons firing at an Atron with blasters. I'm going to want to pull range a little bit and keep my transversal low. Because if I pull range, my optimal plus fall off is going to be his optimal plus fall off, and I'll be able to apply damage better. But if I am the blaster boat, if I'm the blaster frigate, then I want to get in close, web, and reduce the transversal velocity while also keeping the range low. So again, just because they're the same size of ship, you're going to have drastically different tactics based on the optimal and the fall off of your turrets. Yeah, 1-2 buckle my shoe, there you go. Losing ships is excellent. Losing ships teaches you things. Earlier you posted a kill mail with Talos. Why did you use tracking computers and not webs? Because that was a conga hammer fit. That was the short range damage conga hammer fit. And we weren't sure what we were going to be fighting. I had railguns that I was using in that ship, but switched out to blasters. Webs would have been also a good option on that ship, but I also wanted to make sure that I could track relatively small stuff. And also pull some range. I think that I had those trackers bonused for range with a script at that point. So blasters have a relatively small engagement radius, and I was using range a little bit as my tank on that ship. It's a really thin tank, Alice, and so it's not like a really get in close and brawl it out ship like a Brutix would be, or even a Myrmidon for that matter. So webs would probably be more useful on a Brutix, but I think it's just, it depends. If I had put more tank in the lows, because I think that I had a mag stab in one of my load slots, if I'd put in another either specific or general armor hardener, then I might have wanted to put webs in the mid slots. But then I'm minimizing the damage on a ship that's all about damage, and it's not as much about tank. So. I should teach a fitting class, because that's one of the really important principles about fitting, is that before you ever think about what you want to put on your ship, you should think about what you want to do with your ship and work it all towards a particular role. All right, guys, I'm going to head out myself. I'm going to get a nap because I woke up early for this class. So or for these two classes. Thank you guys all for coming out, especially those of you who stuck around for both of them. It's a lot of fun. And to those of you who are not in the uni who came out, thank you so much for coming. It really is a lot of fun to be able to teach these classes to everybody. And if you ever decide that you want to join the uni, just go ahead and join up. We have a lot of opportunities that you can take advantage of. We have presences in all different classes of space, null-sec, low-sec, high-sec, wormhole space, and we do mining, and we do PvP fleets and high-level PvE with incursions. So, and it's generally just a really nice group of folks. So, and yes, I will, Insul, if you just send me a form private message, that would be the best place to send it. And I will make sure to take out a Triforce fleet at some point this week so that we can learn all about tracking and all of that kind of stuff in practice. Well, Naregan, when you do, let me know. Drop me a line. All right, guys. Have a good rest of your day. Naregan, no, I do not run the wormhole campus. I am a very low skill point member of the